Hello.
Hi, Todd.
Hey, good to meet you virtually, Pete.
Nice to meet you virtually too. Where are you at, Todd?
I'm in Windsor, Ontario, Canada.
Oh, very nice. Why is it that Windsor has like a big tech scene? Is there a big university there?
There is a university here. All Canadian universities are basically public.
Yeah.
All of the accredited ones are. So I wouldn't say it's big. It's a university. It has a decent computer science department.
I feel like I've heard of Windsor as like a tech place, and I think it might have been because of the comp sci department there.
Yeah, I think Waterloo is 4
Oh,
hours
maybe
away.
I'm thinking of Waterloo.
Waterloo is definitely a big one. It's the Silicon Valley of Canada.
Okay.
And so we get some of their like orbiters, I'd say. And the other thing
Yeah.
that does contribute some to Windsor is we're across the river from Detroit. So I used to work in Detroit.
Okay.
Detroit's a bigger city, obviously, in the US.
Very cool. So are you south? Is that part of Canada south of the whatever parallel the
Yep.
line? So
Yeah.
I'm north of you, even though I'm in the US and you're in Canada.
Yeah,
I'm like
the
right up against the
42nd.
border of Vancouver. So
Yeah. Yeah. So we are south of the 42nd parallel, and yeah, actually, like the U.S. is immediately to my north. I go north to go to the United States.
whoa,
Mind-boggling to people.
Hey guys.
Hey.
I found out that Toronto was on the same latitude as Rome or something like that, and I think that changed my perception of Canada. It can't be that snowy.
Yeah, but just like the Midwest of the U.S., there's when you're not on the Mediterranean, the
Right.
weather's quite different.
Yeah.
How about you, Pete? Where'd you say you were? You're in the U.S.?
You mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in Washington State, like just south of the Canadian border.
Oh yeah, you said that just
Bellingham, yeah. It's one of those things where I just tell people I'm near Seattle, and that's kind of good enough. It's like all Australians are from Melbourne or Sydney, apparently, even though they grew up on like a farm like 2 hours out of Sydney or something.
I think we'll give people a few more minutes. I'm sure Mike's coming. Oh, the other thing that could be a complicating factor here, I hope Mike's not fallen victim to it, is that the wind, I live relatively close to Mike. He lives in Michigan, and the wind here is crazy right now. So we're getting almost 90-kilometer-an-hour winds. So like I think that's about 55 in US units. It's wild. So I think he may have intermittent power outages. I'll give him a few minutes.
Hello, sorry about that. Some
No problem.
Confusion.
No problem. I was just mentioning that both you and I are in the midst of a big windstorm, so there may be sudden losses of communication, which we'll deal with if they occur.
All right. There's a few others that may join, and we can go ahead and get started.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey there.
Sorry, we had some confusion because there's 2 meetings right now. So it seems you're already feature flagging meetings here. So for some reason, it seems that Google did not update, but this is the right meeting, the one you're in, but that's the reason why some people are late here.
But Google is correct. It didn't go out to Outlook, the update. I have no idea. Anyhow.
All right, perfect. David, you want to kick it off, or would you like me to?
No, sure, I'll kick it off. So yeah, thanks everyone for being here. Sorry for the multiple updates that went out in the last few days. So whoever didn't receive, I'm not sure why, but they did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
In any case, today I think Justin had volunteered to be our scribe. So for the next meeting, if there are any volunteers for the role of scribe or facilitator, please put them in the Google Doc, which I will now also link in the chat unless it's already been put there. And other than that, I've also posted a link to a new doodle, seeing as the other one had expired, where you can put in your preferences for the meeting times. The new doodle will expire on the 15th of April, so you have 2 weeks. So I'm counting on you. Other than that, I'll pass the mic on to Mike, which has prepared a few things.
Well, first we have introductions for new people.
Sorry. Yeah. So I'm not sure who would like to start off.
Well, if this is your first meeting, just briefly say who you are for the rest here. That's straightforward, yeah.
I can
Yeah,
start for
I'll
next
jump
time. Oh,
Go on, Kevin.
go
You
ahead,
go.
Matt. Go ahead, Matt.
All right. Yeah, I'm Matt Elwell. I'm CTO at Flagsmith. I believe you've probably met Ben Romech, who's been on a lot of these meetings, CEO here. So Ben's unavailable today, so standing in for Ben.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks. Yeah, nice to meet everyone.
That's
I
just
guess I'll
you,
go
Daniela.
next.
Oh yeah, Todd. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, this is I joined I think just after the last meeting, so this is technically my first one. I'm Todd Bart. I'm a senior software engineer at Dynatrace. Yeah, it's good to be here. Excited.
Hi, Andreas, go-to-market product manager for cloud automation at Dynatrace.
Hi, I'm Dan O'Brien. I'm an ecosystem engineer at LaunchDarkly and excited to be here.
Perfect. Thanks. Kevin, do you have something?
I was gonna say I can subscribe for
Oh,
next time. And
perfect.
I'm Kevin Chu from GitLab. Hi, okay.
Perfect. All right. Yeah, I'm Mike Beamer with Dynatrace as well. I think most of you have probably met me on previous calls. And I just have a couple topics. And in the future too, if anyone has any agenda items, please feel free to add them to this doc. And that way we can definitely kind of drive the discussion going forward. First off, topic that I had was just some overall brand improvements. So it kind of came up a week or so ago in our Slack channel. Our logo is certainly a placeholder logo, and I have a GitHub issue around that already, with a couple of just potential ideas in there. If you have any ideas, certainly feel free to just include it in there. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Eloise, that we may have access to a designer next week. So if you have any strong opinions one way or the other, please express them in that issue, and we can take that into account when we meet with the team.
Yeah, so we have one of our designers being available there, and his request was more or less to give them more background on the project, so everything would be like what the project represents, what it does, and I'll also ask him to if you ask questions there and share it with you, obviously on the issue, and he can then make some proposals for what the logo is going to look like.
I also roped in some designer from GitLab, so hopefully we can make a proposal.
We make it the challenge between two designers. They love it.
There we go.
Put in all your creativity and then we tell you which of your two designs that you put all your personality into we like more. I mean, it's the best for designers. Yep, down here.
Perfect. All right. Sounds good. Yeah. So yeah, just hopefully we have an update for that at the next community sync. It's not super important, but branding is also a part of this as well, I suppose. We did get a new website domain, so openfeature.dev. That was in a roundabout way donated by the CNCF, even though we're not officially a project as part of it, but it does probably show at least a level of interest from their perspective, which is great news for us going forward. And then just with the website in general, like right now it's pretty basic. So it is something that we should consider some improvements to it. If there's minor copy that you want to suggest, that's all available on that GitHub repo as well. So feel free to open a pull request or update Slack if there's anything that's confusing or out of date. All right, next topic, KubeCon EU. So at least Todd and I will be there. So if anyone else is going to be there, I'd love to meet you in person, maybe schedule some workshops or whatever makes the most sense. I have never been to KubeCon, so I don't really know what to expect, but we are hoping to have at least some touch points at the event. So, next one.
I'll be there as well.
Perfect. Yeah, cool. So we should definitely chat about that. Hopefully maybe some more information at the next community sync where we could talk about ways we could promote the project there and maybe get together. Next one.
What do you mean?
What's up?
You mean getting together at KubeCon?
Yes.
We will have a boat. We'll have a pirate boat. So you will all get invited to a 2-hour trip on a pirate boat.
Okay, so
that's not a joke or anything. It's an actual boat. Like we got a cemented boat, and we will obviously invite like people from this project, from others we're working on, plus some people from the TOC and the tags that are working there, and get them on a boat trip. I mean, remember, what do you do in Valencia? I mean, you get on a boat. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah, so if you have the ability to go to KubeCon EU, you can ride on a pirate ship with us, I guess. So
Yeah,
try to make
bring
that
your
happen.
seasickness pills, I guess.
Something. So cool. And vendor update and responsibilities. So welcome to Harness and Launch Darkly. It's really great to have them on board. I don't think we have a representative from Harness yet, but they did agree to be a part of this project. So hopefully we'll start seeing them in future community meetings. Let's see here. The other pieces, I've been asked a couple times how the different vendors can really help contribute to this. At the moment, it's really helping with the spec. So we're working on, what's up? I thought someone had a comment, but basically we're working on the research phase right now, but really quickly we want to start porting that over to like the initial version, kind of an experimental version of the spec itself. And it's going to be extremely important to make sure that the providers for the different vendors, the core functionality is supported, really well with minimal burden on the developers using the OpenFeature SDKs. So that's just a very important area to focus on. We'll do our best to make sure that it works across all vendors, but there are quite a few. And so it really would be a huge help if the vendors themselves could basically be very responsible for their own provider and making sure that that fits in and works well. Related to that, we should figure out a strategy for end-to-end testing of these providers. So if we're going to make changes to the spec, we want to make sure that all the downstream providers work and that does not have any negative impact on the different providers that have already written integrations for this system. They'll become more important as the spec stabilizes, but that's something to kind of float the idea out there that we do need to make sure that these changes don't have kind of adverse effects on the downstream providers. And then the last one was, this is just kind of an idea to float out there by some of the vendors, but as people like core maintainers to OpenFeature are working on trying to ensure kind of a vendor neutral system. Right now we've signed up for free trials, but they expire in some cases. So perhaps having some kind of either shared environment where we can be invited to and we can experiment with a few different features, or extending a free trial at least for a couple weeks or months. So if you represent a particular vendor and you're interested in helping us in that front, definitely let us know. Any questions on that topic or feedback? Nope. Okay, Cool. Next one is I'd like to propose that we submit a pull request to the OpenTelemetry semantic convention related to feature flagging. It is recommended to keep it, project and vendor neutral. So we wouldn't even call this OpenFeature. It would just be called feature flag. And I do, if you have access to this doc, you can see the initial GitHub issue I created, which refers back to the OpenTelemetry spec and what their naming conventions recommend. And I did take an initial crack at what I thought would be useful, but your feedback there would be really, really helpful. Also, an OpenTelemetry maintainer I talked to said that if we can get some vendors to basically give it a thumbs up, thumbs down, or some suggested modifications, it will make it easier for us to eventually merge into OpenTelemetry. Which then again, that's in the OpenTelemetry spec, so that should mean that all observability vendors should be aware of these semantic convention properties, which means that whatever we put in there could be handled special in observability like UIs. So I think Todd's going to show an example of that in just a little bit of where that could be used. But think about how you could see like the flag IDs, the backend provider, maybe even links back to like managing that individual flag. So a lot of opportunities for enhanced like troubleshooting and debugging. So pretty important topic here, and I'd like to get the ball rolling as quickly as possible. It also lets the OpenTelemetry team know what we're up to. So a lot of things to gain from that. I think that's it.
Do you think it's worth like trying to do like a survey or something so there's the different OTel providers, right? Like I don't know, like Lightstep and Honeycomb and all the rest of them. Is it worth doing like a survey in their community Slacks or mailing lists or wherever their communities are to ask people who are kind of already instrumenting their feature flag what they use, just as a kind of starting from a point of what people are doing today? I don't know. If
Yeah,
that's
I can float that out for sure. I'll reach out to one of the OpenTelemetry maintainers to see if we can get that information.
Yeah.
Not sure what their means of collecting that feedback is, but I'll try to have an update by maybe the next meeting related to that.
I mean, I would guess most of the people, I would guess just with the people who are involved in this group are probably plugged into probably collectively all of the various providers, or many of them. Like I definitely could post on the Honeycomb Slack. If there was a survey, I could easily just post it on the Honeycomb Slack and at least get some data points that way. I'm sure there's other people who are in various other kind of communities for the different OTel providers.
Do you think it would make sense to do a survey, or maybe just link out to that like GitHub issue and just get some comments there?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
A question for the group, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, maybe running it via the TCs and the language implementations would be the most convenient, linking back to our issue.
I mean, it's definitely super low effort to just post, hey, there's this group that are trying to standardize the feature flag conventions. Here's the GitHub issue. Take a look at it.
Yeah, perhaps maybe we start with that then. So if you do have some channels to post that in, if we feel like a survey is more appropriate, we could certainly go ahead and create that. And then the OpenTelemetry maintainer that I talked to recommended that we could basically use our thread in OpenFeature and reference that in the pull request when we go ahead and try to define that in the spec, and that should be sufficient from their perspective. So if we can basically have a nice communication thread on that issue, it should be enough to kind of validate that we've done like our due diligence there. Cool. Any other feedback on those topics? All right, hand it off to Todd then.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, so the first thing that I should mention is the glossary. So as we have discussions, we've had some pretty interesting and elucidating discussions. And I think one of the things we should keep in mind is we need to make sure we're talking about the same things when we use very precise terms. So I did create a glossary, and since then there's been a number of items added to it. feel free to take a look at that. When you are feeling like you're not sure, what kind of term to use, or you feel like there's a term we're missing, some convention we need to kind of unify around, please submit a PR for the glossary, just so we can improve our communication, especially because we're not always in real-time meetings like this. I just wanted to highlight that. I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the recent discussions and proposals, and even some basic implementations we've done. So for those of you who have followed up on the spec discussion, one of the things we've spent some time on recently is adding better type support. We did some surveys of existing SDKs and vendors and found that having strongly typed flag results, flag values, is pretty common. And what we're trying to do is create a union of a lot of these SDKs and a unified standard. So we were trying to kind of come up with a proposal for that and some interfaces for it. So I linked a discussion that I thought was pretty productive, and I'm going to share my screen really quickly and just go over some of the code. So when I say the code, what I'm talking about is really just a reference repo. We have this SDK Research repo. For those of you who haven't looked at it, so this is an NX project. It's NX is nice. It's just an implementation detail, but it's nice because it allows us to kind of pretend like these are separate published packages, which allows us to get a handle on how the dependency graph actually looks between all these different packages, and show how just maintain a more realistic dependency hierarchy that we may at some point want to implement with actual publicly published modules for various languages. But I'm going to go quickly through what we have here and do a little demo in a bit. So we have some types here. We have this features type, and this essentially is the very basic API for getting strongly typed flag values. And we have a number of providers implementing this at this point. So you can see they're typed. It's all asynchronous in this case. You see string flags, you see number flags, and you see even more complex JSON flags, which a few providers support. We try to abstract that all away. I'll open up a particular implementation kind of at random here. This is the CloudBees provider, which Steve Arch, who's not with us today, is from CloudBees. He initially committed, and we've since adapted it with the moving interfaces. But you can see here we have the same interface here, just implemented by this provider. And there's a little bit of basic logic. We have some convenience methods that are exported by the SDK as well that help kind of take the provider specific flag responses and do some validation just to make the behavior as consistent as possible across all the different providers. And if you look at the consuming code, obviously it has no idea what the underlying provider is, but you can see that we now have type safe values. We have booleans for booleans. We have strings for strings. So this value is a string. So that's the introduction to this repository. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's really a good experimentation ground. But again, I want to highlight that's all this is. This is just for experimentation. It's just for maybe implementing your first toy provider with a vendor you might be interested in, and doing some experimentation and what could eventually become our spec. That brings us to the next part of the SDK research that we've been doing. I wanted to highlight. So also in the Google Doc, you'll see there was a proposal around extensibility. It may seem a little bit premature for something like that, but I think it's actually a very important topic to get a handle on early, because we're an SDK that's trying to abstract a lot of functionality. We want to maintain a high amount of extensibility and expose points for integration, while also maintaining a lot of simplicity for the very basic use cases. So how we kind of do advanced features, how we do integrations, we need to figure that out early. So another interface we kind of came up with and is discussed in some proposals is this concept of hooks. So hook is basically an arbitrary extension point where you can register specific logic before a flag evaluation, after, and in a few other what we're referring to as life cycle events during flag evaluation. So these give a lot of opportunity for extension without introducing hard dependencies in our SDK. So we want the SDK to be as to have no dependencies or a very low amount of dependencies, and this allows us to kind of have those extension points without having hard dependencies. So, you know, some examples of types of things that you would do in these hooks, I'm going to demo in a second, but, you know, logging, telemetry, like what Mike was mentioning, custom error handling, validation of flag payloads, perhaps even. So I'm going to show a really quick demo of kind of what I'm talking about to make it less abstract. OpenTelemetry is obviously a first-class use case for us. So this would probably be a good example of something that we would implement. We'd implement an OpenTelemetry hook and publish it so that consumers could take advantage of OpenTelemetry without forcing OpenTelemetry as a dependency of just using OpenFeature. So here you can see we have a hook. OpenTelemetry hook. It implements our hook interface. In the before, it sets up some OpenTelemetry span information, and in the finally, it basically ends the span. So it ends the telemetry data. There's also some exception handling in our error. So as a consumer, you don't need to know about any of this. If you want to wire in OpenTelemetry, really all you have to do is just register as part of OpenFeature your OpenTelemetry hook. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a quick demo, and for this particular demo, I'm just picking an arbitrary provider. The most recent one we implemented was Launch Darkly. So I'm going to launch our Launch Darkly demo. We need to recompile here. Sorry about that. Demo mode. Pardon me. I think we made some last minute changes that was an issue for us here. Just a moment here.
I think you just have to give the hook the type. And maybe
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, this is in the compiled output. So
Otherwise, I thought we can move it back to like doing this at the end of the session because we have some other
I'm sorry. Let's go ahead and do that. Well, I'll come back to the demo. I should be able to figure this out in a couple seconds. Apologize.
Yeah.
I'll stop sharing. Sorry about that. Let's move on to the next point. So I think Mike had something he wanted to mention, or was it? No, it was Stefan and Michael. Or I'll just bring it back to you, Mike.
Hey, can I just quickly ask before we move on, is it that hooks API, is there a specific GitHub issue where we can leave feedback on the kind of the proposal of like the shape of the API?
There is. You'll see it in the Google Doc.
Okay.
Next in the agenda is Alois, who snuck himself.
Yeah, I snuck myself in there because I think there's an opportunity for this team and the work they are doing. In case you're interested, next Wednesday, there would be tag app delivery within the CNCF where you could present the work that's going on in open feature already. So it's not like limited to CNCF projects that are already inside the CNCF, but also for others to gain more like interest in and feedback from people, like the question that Pete brought up as well, like how you doing this today, how's sending telemetry data today. Usually it's a 20-minute presentation. I think we have plenty of material and we could easily share it with the app delivery community. You don't have to do it next week. I'm just saying next week there's most likely a slot being available where you could share it in case you're interested.
Yeah, I think I already have. Oleg had me work with that group, I think, recently. So we're probably good to go, but I can follow up.
I have my demo working if you guys want to pivot
Yeah,
back.
sure. Let's come back to the demo.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, so yeah, demoitis. It wouldn't be a demo if there wasn't some of it. So I fixed my compilation issue here. So anyway, I'll get back to the example hook. So the OpenTelemetry hook, like I said, we have a before, we have an after. I'm starting my demo here, and I'll open the demo page. So this is a very simple demo. It by default, it just serves this very basic welcome message. And then you'll see if we go into Launch Darkly and we change the message, hit save. In a few seconds, this should be updated. So now you can see it's the next gen API. So that's just the basic functionality that we've covered before with this repository. The new stuff that is uncovered with our new hook is our OpenTelemetry. So I'm using Zipkin, which basically is an OpenTelemetry compatible metrics analyzer. I can run a query, and I should be able to see a few activities here, but yeah, you can see this one. This is the API call that I was showing. And the interesting thing, if we dig into this, you can see the stack, and you can see on the stack, we have a feature flag, Boolean. You can see the feature flag name. You can actually see the feature flag ID. You can see the underlying provider. You can see the service name, all this kind of exciting stuff. Yeah, so this is the kind of data that we could hypothetically expose, flag values, all kinds of things. This is really the key of the extensibility, we're talking about. We're saying we don't have a hard dependency on OpenTelemetry, but you can see how these kinds of integrations would be very useful. Other use cases to be considered here, like I said, validation. So one that could be very interesting, say you have a feature flag that controls the color of a banner, and that banner is a CSS hex value. If you could leverage an after hook that would take that value and validate it, just to make sure it's a valid hex value. There's also, arbitrary ways you could transform the response. Logging is another one. So you can see we've kind of injected some logging here. We have another hook implementation. Again, very basic. It just does some console logging, but you can see the life cycle of a flag evaluation just with this kind of stuff. We can add new hooks as well, new hook functionality as well. I think that's it. That's basically all I have to demo.
So Mike, maybe back to Pete's comment on the issue for what we're putting into the semantic convention. I wonder whether it might make sense for a feature flagging tool to actually tell you why they evaluated for a certain value, especially when I use it for debug.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, that's another very valid use case, and that's kind of why we have this error hook. So the error hook only evaluates in the case of an error. So if there was some kind of error condition, and we'd have to in the spec define what those would be, right? So that could be couldn't connect to the provider, an error, a type error with the provider. You would get that information in the error hook, and you could interrogate it additionally. We're also thinking probably if you throw in an error hook, it's not something that the API is going to handle. So for having like fail loud implementations, you could have an error hook that simply rethrows errors. So that would just be a way to add visibility to the system. We want, in general, I think we want the API to behave in such a way that failures never cause runtime issues. There was a long back and forth on that, and certainly it's something we can continue to discuss. I think Pete might have some slightly different ideas, but this was a way this is another possible way that we could kind of configure that very flexibly, depending on how.
I think I'm talking about a different use case. So assume that I have a feature flag that evaluates to true when I'm looking at the trace that you show, but I have no idea because the rule handling is done in the feature flagging backend. And I might want to find out why is it true? It should always be false. And then say, yes, it is true because of I don't know, the region is set to something specific or the rule that was triggered was this type of rule. It might be more of a debugging functionality because you don't want to send this back verbally all the time, but at least providing an ability that you can put this into a trace. Assume you deploy the system, you have all the rules, but the system is kind of behaving funky. And you have no idea, they can kind of switch it off and then see it in the traces why things are happening because maybe, well, like sticking to this example, people are evaluating the region and they would have turned it on for Japan, realizing it's not on for Japan, and then seeing that they're validating the IP of the gateway rather than the X forwarded for IP, realizing it and then being able like to fix that type of problem.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. I think I see a lot of value in what you're proposing. I think the underlying challenge would be getting that information from the feature flag provider, right? So when a decision is made, there's context that's injected. I can't say, for example, how many feature flag providers are doing that evaluation on the client. I think most of them are. There's also a few that I believe do them in the server. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's the case. So exposing some amount of information about that would definitely be a huge positive. We'd have to do research to understand exactly how we could do that in a unified way, and then expose that as interfaces on the provider. Agreed.
Maybe like a kind of nice generic extensible way of doing it would be to let providers attach kind of arbitrary, like essentially like attributes in OTel, right? Where you could attach kind of like metadata about the flagging decision, and that would be available on the hook context. And then in turn, like when you're creating those OTel attributes, you could add whatever that metadata is into OTel. And then so basically you kind of like providing kind of like a mechanism for an extension point at the flag, like in the flag provider, to put some metadata in there, and then another extension point in the hook, so you can kind of grab that metadata and use it to put kind of custom stuff into your OTel or your logging or whatever. And then providers can figure out what metadata makes sense for them in terms of like documenting things like how things were evaluated. And then if it turns out that 4 different providers are all putting the same metadata in, then you kind of start standardizing that and surfacing it as a thing that's like defined by OpenFeature. So kind of very similar to the way attributes work in OTel, where you start with just put anything you want, and then we'll kind of put some conventions about some standard things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I agree that could be a good approach. And it sounds somewhat similar to, I think, the problem we're going to face with defining the context.
Yeah.
So we have context already in a lot of providers, and exactly what parameters are in there, exactly how they map from some kind of OpenFeature spec to the internal provider understanding of those same parameters. I think there may be some overlap there, but I agree. Yeah, that's probably a good approach.
In the fact that I think it does exist in some providers already, like the ability, I think LaunchDarkly, for example, you can actually see like the rule evaluation if you do like their detailed method. So we could maybe look there, start and see what they expose, and maybe just encourage other vendors to add support for it. And it's like kind of optional. It's certainly nice information, but it wouldn't be a hard requirement to have it. So, but showing the value of it, I think it definitely encourages other vendors to also include that information going forward, I think. So yeah, interesting.
And there is some nuance there for the LaunchDarkly side, at least, between client side and server side. It's always there on the server side. On the client side, you have to opt in when you configure it.
Right, and that's a really good point. So far we've really been approaching this only from a server-side SDK perspective, but we are aware that there's a significant differential between how different vendors and providers approach client versus server side. Some treat them very similarly, some treat them very differently. So I think that puts us in a situation where we have to treat them differently. But certainly there's going to be a lot more to consider when we talk about a client side implementation. Yeah, and that's a great point as well. How much of that is going to be exposed? Obviously, there's security and performance implementations with that when we talk about client-side SDKs. Is there any additional comments or questions? Like the GitHub issue, yeah. So this code is obviously, as you witnessed at the beginning, still very much in progress. But I will have a PR open very soon with a with a summary of this kind of functionality. There is an issue that was linked in the discussion, so feel free to take a look at that if you want to comment on these hooks. This is, again, this is ideally our kind of main interface for extensibility, so something we'd like to get a handle on early and understand as best as we can.
I've just got one question. Maybe I should just ask this in the GitHub issue, but it feels like a big kind of decision to be made is whether these hooks can like mess with, they're like middleware where they can kind of change things as things are flowing through them, or are they hooks where they can't really mess with things and they're just kind of like, you know, like a one-way kind of like an observer of the system that can't kind of like mess with the system. That feels like a pretty important kind of design decision to kind of just commit to one way or the other. And maybe if they can mess with stuff, then hooks isn't quite the right word. And if they can't mess with stuff, then hooks is the perfect word. But yeah, probably better to discuss it in the GitHub issue.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's a great point. This is the type of thing that I think we need to decide upon on philosophically. I'm certainly okay with having hooks as like pure side effects with no overall impact on return values or something, but I can see the value in going the other way as well. And we may want two different artifacts. Maybe we want a certain type that's really just a pure side effect with no impact on flag evaluation, and then another interface that actually could and have those as two distinct artifacts. If there's no other questions, I think I'll hand it back to Mike.
Yep, it looks like Stefan and Michael have something on the list, so if they want to add their comments, please.
Quickly asking Alois, actually, maybe you can provide a little bit of background here. What we discussed is that it might be worthwhile creating a buzz on that topic via press releases, collaborating on communications initiative there. Alois, maybe you could share a little bit regarding the rationale of this, because I think you had something on your mind why press release might come in handy here.
Yeah, so the idea was obviously to get this into Sandbox, CNCF, like rather sooner than later. Right now, the TUC is a bit backed up on getting proposals in there. Nevertheless, I think we should let the wider development community know that we're actually working on this with KubeCon. We still have a perfect opportunity where we can come together, but obviously also announce this and talk to interested parties and let them know it ahead of time. And they also talked with the CNCF, and some people also gave me the recommendation, like even when you're not in Sandbox, you can already say you're submitted to Sandbox, push it out there and tweet it that way. So the idea was to do like, that's also why with marketing support here from the Dynatrace team as well, to get like all of the companies together and have a press release or like an official announcement, usually blog posts on the various company blogs, and then also see what we can do around it. And maybe even talk to some journalists on site at KubeCon that we're launching this initiative, what it is about, and getting this out by KubeCon and then helping to organize around this. I think it would make a lot of sense. It actually would help us also within the CNCF ecosystem, because right now not a lot of people know about the project. Also, the initial set of contributing companies here is actually quite impressive. I know that this is going to be most likely quite some work to get so many marketing and PR people in the room. So I totally understand if you do not want to participate or just want to do it on a personal, from a personal perspective, but not from your company perspective. Still, the approach would be, and that's why we brought our team here as well. And I've seen this like work for, I think, the initial Open Telemetry one. The idea to work on one Google Doc, which is more or less the blueprint boilerplate, what we will all be talking about in the press release. And then everybody can obviously tweak and tune them to their liking, obviously bringing their own company focus in there. But like the gist of the message should be the same. So the idea was to get started on this and also propose it if you're interested in joining these activities to your PR and marketing teams. Work on this ideally rather quickly, because KubeCon is actually nearer than most of us think, and then like that's also OpenTelemetry did it, and more or less everybody, all the companies who want to participate, then decide like this goes live on a specific day at a specific time, and then usually also coordinate on like related activities, like if there's really press that wants to talk to us and so forth, that we can align who's talking to them, who wants to participate in this, and so forth. So first question, who wants to like be part of this, either with the blog post or with the press release, and wants to see it, and B, who's obviously also willing to involve their company teams to get this out of the door. Stefan here volunteered to help us like coordinate us and ensure we are getting this out of the door in time. Again, the rest is obviously collaborative effort. I just wanted to bring it up right now. It's now end of March. It just gives us like 1.5 months, which even for PR and approval timelines for most companies should still be fine. So that's the background on this one. And again, it also was one of the recommendations. If you do this, it will most likely also accelerate the CNCF acceptance as well. Because I mean, if you just look at it from that perspective, if everybody's already talking about the project, it was submitted to Sandbox, it should go rather quickly then also their side.
So basically, a quick recap would be that whoever wants to join takes part in an initiative, that we orchestrate a couple of press releases, or we coordinate and align a couple of press releases. We would come up with building blocks to ensure that we all use like matching messaging actually, and that would allow everybody who wants to chime in to create awareness for the respective company, plus of course for the new standard, and to increase basically I mean, pressure is not the right word, but like the awareness on the CNCF side as well, right?
Yeah, and it's not pressure. It's just, I mean, it is a project that people should be aware of.
No, of course. Yeah.
So yeah, please add yourself in case you want to join, and then also add your email address in. Well, we don't have all the email addresses of people which we would need, that we should reach out to you about. I mean, we'll delete it after the meeting so that there's no public document with your email address. Or I was posted in the chat so that then Stefan can help us coordinate, because most likely this will need to be forwarded internally in the real companies. We have a list of.
Any other topics that we should cover then today?
No, that's it.
Perfect.
Well, let's do the other way around. Who does not want to participate? Not wanting to put anybody else. Make it actually easier, hopefully. All right, then we work together like getting this out there and starting the document with like the first draft of the text, and then keep the thing moving. Yeah.
Cool. I guess to quickly summarize then, so I'm going to try to get some documentation on how you can add a provider to our experimental repo. Once that's in place, I would certainly encourage you to do that, especially if you represent a vendor. But if you just have interest in how this could work, play around with that. I think Todd, if you could also maybe add some docs on how to build a hook, some really basic information on that as well. So same thing, you can build a hook, kind of experiment with the life cycle there. Any feedback, is great in those issues. And then hopefully we can start getting this experimental project in a good enough state where we can at least start like an experimental spec effectively. We need to start porting over the obvious pieces. There's some stuff that's very obvious that we can start including in the spec. So starting to get that going as quickly as possible. Hopefully that's something that we can chat about at the next community sync, where we can show maybe like the initial part of the spec. So, it gives us a better framework to start making some modifications to that. From there, then I think it's a matter of basically implementing that spec in a handful of languages, and that's something that we can also chat about. If you have a particular language of expertise, let us know, because that could be really helpful in identifying the best SDKs to kind of start with. That's it for me. if there's nothing else, I guess we can go ahead and wrap up a few minutes.
One question, Mike. When do you think we should do the first provider for like basic Kubernetes CRDs? Because we're like obviously integrating the vendor providers, but like one topic was how can we make like people like experiment and play around with it from a feature flagging perspective?
I might jump in there. One thing that I would like to highlight is we do have a very basic provider that just uses environment variables. So if you want to toy with some of the really basic stuff in the SDK, you can use the environment variable one as a purely conceptual toy. I think it would be nice sooner rather than later as we start the spec to come up with a cloud native, kube native provider. I think that we have right now, we're in a place where we have, again, to kind of do this work of unioning a whole bunch of SDKs and functionality and conceptual backends across many different vendors. And kind of once we start to feel solid about that, I think it puts us in a place where then we can come up with our own cloud native provider that kind of would conform to the interface that's slowly being developed as a union of all those different features. I hope that answers the question, but I feel like as soon as we start to have a very like alpha SDK, seems like a good time to maybe look into a very basic CRD based cloud native type provider. I don't know if Mike agrees with that or anyone else on the call does, but that's my kind of feeling in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, if someone has a strong interest in that area and expertise, especially like getting the discussion happening could probably happen now. We know that there's some basic functionality that has to be in place for this to work. But right now we've just been focusing more on the spec side. So it really kind of from like a resourcing perspective, haven't had the opportunities, but it makes sense to start on it as soon as possible. It makes it a lot easier to kind of tell the story at KubeCon as well if we had something that we could demo. I'm just not sure what's realistic given the timeline.
Yeah, I think it's just. Sorry.
I was just gonna ask, is there more information around where the CRD kind of fits in with this? I'm trying to understand conceptually how it fits in with the rest of the system.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit. So we have like a Kubernetes Operator repo in there, but it's basically just kind of a high-level description of what we were hoping to achieve. And the basic concept is it would just be like another provider, just like the Launch Darkly provider or something. This would be like a cloud-native provider, which would take advantage of some of the Kubernetes, specific patterns like the operator and sidecar, things like that. And we wanted to provide something. So if you were in the Kubernetes world, just getting started with feature flagging, you could use this like cloud native provider to basically immediately feel the benefits of feature flag management. And then it could all be kind of part of the story to replace that with whatever provider you need in the future to serve your future goals. So basically just lowering the barrier to getting started with feature flag management.
Okay, so like the operator would control what flags actually exist. So you would submit the CRD to create a flag in the operator, and then the SDKs could pick that up.
Yeah, and at a high level too, we were hoping to have the evaluation logic in a sidecar process that could be attached to the pod. And then that way we could basically write the evaluation logic in a single language. And then, OpenFeature, you'd register the cloud native provider. It would just communicate with that process and handle flag evaluations to kind of keep things simple. It also has some interesting potential benefits. Like if you look at like Knative or something that's like time sensitive startup, or you wouldn't want to load the SDK and have it pull in the configurations, you could actually offload flag evaluation onto a currently running process. So it is pretty interesting. We also were talking about on that process could also be another interesting touch point for providers to hook into as well. So you could theoretically have like a Launch Darkly provider at that sidecar process level effectively. And maybe we could even, come together and make kind of the operator part work with any kind of backend provider. So if you happen to be in Kubernetes and you felt like there's an architectural advantage of moving flag evaluation to a sidecar or maybe like a daemon set, you could just take advantage of that. So it's still at like
Mike,
kind of
I
the
think-
conceptual stage.
Mike, I think we're like, we're putting up like the whole thing in here, and maybe we should put it into some of the issues, like that's the whole implementation. So I was more like, okay, if like people want to learn more about OpenFeature and how it could feel, this was really like back to Diana's point about like a very simple CRD. You deploy the CRD, a feature is on, you deploy it with the feature being off, or like providing a value, and that's just it without like any complex evaluations. Because I think also as we discussed last time, like one use case is just testing your features as part of your CI/CD process that you want to run. So you actually have test cases where you want certain features to be turned on and have them in the testing. And then like, obviously the other use cases, the more advanced one we can look into later, but just having a CRD that we'll deploy along with the application and change with a simple operator would be a great first step. And I think that the reason why I'm pushing really on this is I think it helps us to get some understanding out there and some momentum in the community that they can play around with it. They can do something that they actually enjoy, even with the early SDKs, as I like it, because right now they kind of can't do this. That's why I would go like really for the super simple. This is a CRD, this is the feature. Even saying that this is not stable, so most likely going this will.
I think it feels like you're going to get more, give more people. You're going to, if you want to give people a way to play with this idea, having early providers with the vendors is going to get way more people. Like, I mean, if someone is interested in trying out this the SDK and the spec, they're probably they're already running a feature flagging system, and just like plugging into that provider would be way less barrier to entry than, hey, start doing feature flagging from scratch using this experimental feature flagging provider. Like I feel like you'll get more. It's a lower barrier to entry to say, if you're using Launch Darkly, here's an experimental provider with this SDK, versus if you're using whatever feature flagging you're using or not, start running a brand new feature flagging implementation.
It's almost a different story. Like I see your point, Pete, but I also see what Alois is saying. Like I think that and we may want to prioritize one of those stories over the other, but I think they're both extremely valuable.
I think
and we can just decide what we want to do first, what we want to do second. But I mean, if you're in a Kubernetes environment, you already understand Kubernetes. You already understand CRDs, and maybe you even have some understanding in terms of writing your own operator, and you've just never been in the feature flag world. It could be a really good point of entry for people to get into the feature flagging world, because they do understand all these somewhat esoteric Kubernetes concepts, and it's a way to break into that intellectual space of feature flags.
Yeah,
as well.
That makes sense to me. I think. To me, I think what would be important to get right from the beginning is not to conflate these two things too much, because it's going to be really confusing for people. Like I think I saw a tiny bit of like Daniel's kind of confusion of like, wait, is OpenFeature like an SDK for kind of like standardizing how we use feature flags, or is it a feature flagging kind of providing system? I think, but I get the value of both of those things, and having like a Kubernetes-based reference implementation, super good. If we call both of these things OpenFeature, it's going to cause a ton of confusion, I think. So I think it's important to have like OpenFeature, the spec, the SDK, whatever, essentially the equivalent of OpenTelemetry, and then an implementation of it, ideally not also called OpenFeature, like having it be like OpenTelemetry and then OpenTelemetry server or something, I think would be really confusing, like the equivalent of that. So I think having OpenTelemetry and Zipkin or Jaeger or something like that, it helps people who are brand new to this and don't know what's going on. There's going to be a ton of confusion otherwise, I think, of like, oh yeah, have you heard about that OpenFeature thing? It's like a Kubernetes based open source feature flagging implementation. Someone else is like, wait, I thought it was like an SDK for blah, 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 blah. I think it's really important to get the naming clear.
Yeah, I think that does make sense. It does kind of alleviate some of the issues that I've already kind of experienced, even on like the main landing page and stuff. So I think that
Yeah.
is good feedback and something we should certainly chat about.
I think they're both super valuable things to do. I think it's just going to be confusing if we don't make it clear which is which.
Mhm.
Yeah, but maybe then we create doc tests. I think it would make them clear, like using OpenFeature even in the alpha state with launch directly, with scout please, and then obviously the various participants can just submit the page. I kind of make it work with that one. Linking even to the very experimental one, I think would make it way more obvious, because I would click on docs and if I see, okay, this is how you use it with providers, and this is like how you maybe use it like with environment variables, it would make it, to your point, Pete, I think much clearer, because that's the first thing you do. Is like, I like it, feature flagging, what does it do exactly? Clicking on the docs, and if that's getting started with launch directly, with scout please, with like all of those solutions, it becomes pretty obvious. And okay, there's also like a simplistic implementation like the one we have right now with environment variables. I'm kind of like getting the idea.
Yep. So I think that's a good takeaway. We can try to chat about that asynchronously then. But good point. Thanks, Pete. Cool. Looks like we're basically out of time. So yeah, appreciate everyone's time today. And yeah, let us know. Certainly stay involved. No. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.